we may run out of time this morning. Down here with my buddy Kenny. And most of you know that I've been questioning Kenny, trying to find out as much as I can about him and him about me. And by knowing each other better, that's just going to deepen our relationship with one another. He's talked about colors that he likes, food. He loves children. I've talked about color, birthmark, a movie series that I like. And so now I'm going to conclude this series by finding one other thing about my man Kenny. So Kenny, what can you tell me that I may not know about you? Okay, favorite TV show, King of Queens. All right. Kenny, I'm going to tell you something else about me. And so far I've just shared with you a couple of surface, nothing big about me, but I'm going to share with you something that I feel like is really a gift that God has given me. And maybe this will deepen our relationship with each other. You'll understand me a little bit better. One of the things about me is that God has gifted me with the ability to forgive. And that's not to pat myself on the back. I believe that God has given me that gift. I've had people throughout my lifetime who have hurt me and have continued to hurt me, but come and ask forgiveness. And I'm very quick to forgive as a friend. And I definitely look at that as a blessing and a gift of God. I don't like conflict. I don't like harboring bad feelings. That's just not me. And so maybe that will help you to understand me a little bit better, Kenny. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been trying to understand God. We've talked about God's faithfulness. We've talked about God's wisdom, how He is all-wise, all-knowing. We've talked about how God is love, and today, Kenny, to help deepen our relationship with God, we're going to talk about God's power. Look at Psalm chapter 66, verse 7. Our God is all-powerful, and the psalmist says He rules by His what? His power forever. Gary last week did a great job of leading us in singing. He led the song, Our God is an Awesome God. And I love that song because it talks about how God reigns in wisdom and what? And power and love. But it points out the very thing I'm trying to get across to you guys is that our God in His awesomeness is all powerful. In other words, there is nothing too hard for God. There is nothing impossible for God. Now, I do want to bring this up this morning, and this may shock some of you. Nothing is impossible with God as long as it goes along with His character and His will. Okay? In other words, because God is holy, there are certain things that God cannot do. James chapter 1 verse 13 talks about how God cannot tempt you and me to do evil. That's not His character. He wants to draw us into a relationship with Him so that we can be saved and lead us away from that kind of stuff. Also, Hebrews chapter 6 verse 18 talks about how God cannot lie. And I don't know about you, but that's one of the things I love about God. Talking about His faithfulness has just been amazing to me. That has really deepened my relationship with God. I know that God is not going to lie to me, and so nothing is impossible for God as long as it goes along with His character and His will. And I think that there are things that bear this out. There are things that bear out the power of God. I'm going to share some of those with you. First of all, creation. Creation shows the power of God. Darius, if you will, run that video for me. I want to show you a brief clip this morning that I thought was really good. I saw this on YouTube. Francis Chan talks about how God created the universe.
First of all, this is the earth. Okay, just you're taking off from the earth from Southern California, and we're gonna rise up for a little bit here. Okay, we're gonna pull away from it. We're gonna pull higher. Now this is at about 10 kilometers. Like if you climb Mount Everest, this is what you'd see. You'd see the curvature of the earth from that distance. Now we're gonna climb up even higher. This is at 100 kilometers. And you're a fourth of the way to the space station now. This is what you'd see. If you get to this level, you're considered an astronaut. Just if you ever get there. Okay, now we're going 100,000 kilometers. 100,000 kilometers from the Earth. You're a fourth of the way to the moon. That's what the Earth would look like. Now we're going to pull away to 1,000,000 kilometers. At 1,000,000 kilometers, there's the moon. Okay, there's the moon. You can barely see the Earth. You're at 1,000,000 kilometers now. You're past the moon, and now we're going to go to 100 million kilometers. 100 million kilometers. You're still not to the sun. The sun's 93 million miles away, but now we're going to go to 10 trillion kilometers. There's the sun. Okay, you just passed the sun. Now you would see all of the planets at 10 trillion kilometers, and now we're at 10 to the 15th power. That means 10 with 15 zeros. I don't know what that number is. 15 zeros, and the sun's just like a bright dot amidst other stars. And now we're going to 10 light years away. At 10 light years away, come on, let's go. Zoom, there you go. 10 light years away. Now you just see the sun with like 11 other stars that are kind of its neighbors. You know, that's our sun. And now we're going to go 1,000 light years away. At 1,000 light years away, you wouldn't even see our sun anymore. These are just a bunch of stars close to it in this cluster inside the Milky Way. Now we're going to zoom out even further, and that's the Milky Way we live in. See that cluster of stars? Those are about 100,000 stars that are closest to our sun. You can't see our sun anymore at this point. Now this is our Milky Way galaxy, and forget about the Earth. Okay, there's our Milky Way galaxy that we live in. And we're just buried in there somewhere. And we're going to pull out even further, and you'll see that our galaxy is actually, it's a big galaxy, and all those other things you're seeing now are galaxies. And we're going to pull away 10 million light years now. His next scene is 10 million light years. Those are all galaxies you see. Amidst our Milky Way, several hundred galaxies. Now we're going to go 100 million light years away. This is the last one. We're going to zoom out to 100 million light years. Those are all clusters of galaxies. Galaxies and clusters of galaxies. You won't even see our Milky Way galaxy anymore amidst that. We don't have telescopes.
Go ahead and cut it off. Now, here's the amazing part. Are you ready for this? God created all that. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning, God, what? He created the heavens and the earth. And this is not even the best part. This isn't even the amazing part. If that's not amazing enough, the how God created all of this really blows me away. Psalm 33, verses 6 through 9, the Lord merely what? Spoke. That's how powerful our God is. Not only did He create all of that, in creating it, all He did was speak. And the heavens were created. He breathed the word, and all the stars were born. He assigned the sea its boundaries and locked the oceans in its vast reservoirs. Let the whole world fear the Lord, and let everyone stand in awe of Him. And this weekend, while I was at SunQuest with our young people, there was a guy there by the name of David, what is it? Skidmore, David Skidmore. And he was talking to the adults, and one of the things that he pointed out to us as adults about our young people today, the biggest problem with our young people is there is no awe of God. No awe. You know, they're more awed by the special effects that they see in a movie. They're in more awe of their high-tech tabs and cell phones. And I don't think it's just our young people. I think those of us who are adults as well, we have lost that awe. of God. God is so powerful, guys, that He created the entire universe, and He did it just by speaking the commands. You know, we may not know that God is loving or that He's faithful, but there is no way that we can look around at creation and not see His power. Romans chapter 1, verse 20, Paul points this out. He says, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are" what? Clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are what? They're without excuse, right? No one can look at the earth and not know the awesome power, the all power of God. Isaiah chapter 40, verse 26 says, "Lift up your eyes on high and see who has created these things, who brings out their hosts by number. He calls them all by name, by the greatness of His might and the strength of His what? His power, not a one of them is missing." And I think this is why our generation doesn't understand the awe of God. He says, lift up your eyes on high. I think so many times we've got our eyes buried down here. And that's not just our young people. I'm guilty of that too. I'm too busy checking my phone. I'm too busy surfing the internet, looking at the computer to take the time to look around and go, man, God created all of this. He is so powerful. Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 12, "But the Lord made the earth by His power, and He preserves it by His wisdom." Jeremiah 32, verse 7, "Ah, sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power." But you know what? Something else that's a testimony to the power of God is the miracles of God. I mean, you get into Scripture, and from the beginning to the very end, we see the awesome power of God in the Old Testament. You have God bringing forth a flood upon the earth through His great power. You see God parting a sea. You see God sending fire down from heaven and just annihilating an altar before the 450 prophets of Baal. Then you move into the New Testament. We're skipping over a lot of miracles, a lot of God, showing off His power. But you get into the New Testament and you see God's Son, Jesus, and God working through Him, through His power, to heal those who are lame and blind, many from birth, to see Him cast out demons, to see God raise people from the dead, to see God, the Son of God, stand on the bow of a boat in the middle of a storm and say, "Peace, be still," and the storm, the winds, and the waves obeying Him and going completely calm. There's no way you can look at the miracles of God and not see the power of God. But then also, we see the power of God through the resurrection. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14, and God both raised up the Lord and will also raise up who? Raise up us. How? By His power. I think one of the greatest testimonies to the power of God is 3 days after His Son died, God, through His awesome power, rolled away that stone and caused His Son to walk out. But here's the question, do we really believe that? I mean, really, do we have the faith to know that God is powerful enough, really, to accomplish anything? There may be some of you in here, like me at times, you have this list. It's not written on paper, but it's written on our hearts, and basically we could label that list as things that are too hard for God. That's why we give up, right? That's why we say that's impossible. That's why we use terms like that's hopeless. But nothing is impossible with God. So often we doubt, kind of like Abraham and Sarah. You know, you look at Abraham and Sarah, and they wanted a son so badly, but Sarah was barren. But the Lord comes to Abraham and says, your wife, even in her old age, is going to have a son. And if you really look at the text, Genesis chapter 18, verses 13 through 14, Sarah didn't believe it. It says, and the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Remember, when she heard the news that she was going to have a baby, she chuckled. Probably like many of you, if I told you you were going to have a baby, you would laugh. Man, I'm too old. There's no way that I could do that. And she laughed. And the Lord says to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? Saying, shall I surely bear a child since I am old? And the Lord responds to that, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. And guess what, folks? She did. That's the power of God. And you know, the most important thing here is not that you understand God's power. Because none of us will ever get to that point in this lifetime. And so it's not important that you necessarily understand the power of God. What is important is that you believe and that you walk by faith, knowing that with God nothing is impossible. Let me share with you some things that are not impossible for God. First of all, number one, God is able to work in your life. So oftentimes we doubt that, maybe because of things that we've done in the past. You know, some of our failures. But we doubt that God could use us and work in our lives, which there's a couple in the New Testament that kind of went through something like this. Their names are Zacharias and Elizabeth. And their case was very similar to Abraham and Sarah. God comes to them. He sends the angel Gabriel to tell them, listen, you guys are going to have a baby. Now, they'd been trying for years, but Elizabeth was barren. And so when Zacharias, this priest, this man of God, who had probably taught the same story of Abraham and Sarah, you know, who believed in the power of God, when God actually sent an angel to tell him that he was going to work in his life and he was going to do the same thing in his life, Zacharias didn't believe it. He said, man, I've got to see a sign. And the angel said, hush. Silence. And because of Zacharias' doubt in the power of God, for 9 months, Zacharias couldn't speak. But you know what? Everything that God said came true. That little boy, his name was John. He paved the pathway for our Lord Jesus. Now, during that same time, you have another individual who was given a baby. And in contrast to Zacharias and Elizabeth, the angel Gabriel comes to her. Her name is Mary, and says, you're going to have a baby. And in contrast to that, this is what Mary says, behold, the maidservant of the Lord, let it be to me according to your word. And the angel departed. In other words, God, whatever you say, I believe it. I'm all in. Now, you have to understand, Mary was a virgin. And Gabriel tries to explain to her how all of this is going to take place through the power of God. This is what he said to her. The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the highest will overshadow you. And he says that Holy One who is to be born will be called the Son of God. Now, indeed, Elizabeth, your relative, has also conceived a son in her old age, and this is now the 6th month for her who was called barren, For with God, nothing is impossible. And then that's when Mary says, I'm all in. You see, Mary didn't understand the how, but you know what? She believed in the power of God. She didn't understand how God was going to do all that, but she believed that God could do it, and she was all in. Do you really believe that God can come into your life? Do you believe that He can transform you and work on you in a way that maybe to you it seems impossible? Maybe you're struggling with an addiction. Maybe you're struggling with a sin. There's no way I could change. With God, anything's possible. Which really leads us to our next point, and that is, or better yet, let me share some passages with you. We're almost out of time, but I'm going to share some of these with you. Psalm 68, verse 35, "O God, you are more awesome than your holy places. The God of Israel is He who gives strength and power to who? To His people." Blessed be God. Ephesians 1, verses 19 through 20, I also pray that you will understand the incredible greatness of God's what? Power for us who believe in Him. This is the same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated Him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms. In Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20, "Now to Him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to His" what? His power that is at work where? Within us. But do we believe it? Do we believe that God could come into our life and work in us? Here's the next point. Something else God is able to do is He's able to free you from bondage. You know, there is no claim on you that God's power cannot break. Nothing. Jeremiah chapter 32, it's kind of an interesting passage. I'm going to kind of set the context for you. The Babylonians have surrounded Jerusalem. It's over. Israelites are fixing to fall. They're fixing to be taken into captivity some 1,000 miles away. But before the walls come down and the Babylonians come in and take them off, God tells Jeremiah to do something that's very odd. He says, "Jeremiah, I want you to go and I want you to purchase some land." And he says the point of that is to show all Israel that I still have a future with them. Well, God, how in this world could you still have a future with us? And how in this world could you bring us back to this place? Because that's what God promises. He says, I will bring them back to this place and I will cause them to dwell in safely. I'm going to bring them back from Babylonian. Well, how in the world are we going to get past the king? How in the world are we going to get past his army? How in this world can we be set free from bondage like that? And if you back up to verses 26 through 27, this is what God tells Jeremiah. "Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything impossible for me? I can free you from this king. I can free you from the Babylonians." Just like there's no chain, there's no barrier, there's no situation that I can't enter into, whether it's the chains of addiction, whether it's to help you escape the bondage of sin, I can help you. I can free you from that bondage. But then lastly, let me mention this. God is able to make certain your salvation, which is awesome. There was a young man that came to Jesus. And he was a very moral man of character. And you could tell he was blessed of God. He was very wealthy. And God, or the wealthy man comes to Jesus and he says, "What have I got to do to be saved?" And Jesus says, well, obey my commandments. He says, I've done that. I've done that since I was a youth. And God says, well, then what you've got to do is you've got to put me first. I want you to get rid of anything and everything. I want you to sell anything and everything that you are putting before me. And the man couldn't do it. And the disciples, they see this and they're astonished. And I mean, here's a guy, he's moral, he's rich. I mean, God has blessed him. And they look at Jesus, they say, well, then who can be saved? I mean, because look at us, Jesus. I mean, we are a mess. Jesus looked at them and said to him, with men this is impossible. He says, but with God all things are possible. You know, so oftentimes we worry about our salvation. We look back at our past, we look at our yesterdays, and we think about things that we've done. Maybe even as a Christian, and we think, man, God can't save me. I think about Hebrews chapter 7, verses 24 through 25, that he, because he continues forever, has an unchangeable priesthood. Therefore, he is also able to save to the utmost those who come to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. And I love that word, always. But he's made a way. Jude 24, now to him who is what? Able to keep you from stumbling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. What are you saying? God has the power to save you. He's already made the preparation. He's already sent his son to die for you. Why? Because there's nothing too hard for God. Absolutely nothing. The power of God is available to make a difference in our lives. But do we believe it? I want to close out this series this morning, and I hope from the lessons that we've had over the last couple of weeks, as we talked about God's faithfulness and his love and his wisdom and his power. I mean, I really hope that this has caused you to grow in your appreciation for God. I mean, I hope that it's just deepened your love for God. I'm going to share with you an illustration that I got from SunQuest. David Skidmore did this illustration, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. It was amazing how really this whole SunQuest youth rally has been about the very thing that I've been talking about for the last several weeks, and that is connecting with God, having an intimate relationship with God. Right out the good stuff. Kenny, come on up here, buddy. How's that look, man? You like chocolate milk? Awesome. You see that? Kenny, what these three glasses represent is really we find ourselves in at least one of these three glasses spiritually. I mean, all of us find ourselves in one of these three. The first one, I poured chocolate into this bowl, and you'll notice, man, it's right there, but the chocolate's not getting into the milk. And that represents some of you here this morning who, you know what, God, He's right there, but you're just not letting Him in. I mean, you've just said, you know, I don't believe in God. You know, I've got things that, you know, mean more to God, to me, and so, you know what, God's just not a top priority to me, and you won't let Him in. Then over here, Kenny, you can see, man, if you stand down here, you can see the chocolate in this second one right here, and really this represents those of us this morning who maybe we said, you know what, I've been baptized into Christ. I come to services. I study my Bible, but you know what? I don't have a relationship with God. And we talked about that in the very first lesson. Now, that's very much possible. The Pharisees, Jesus says, you know what? You're the religious leaders. You know the Scriptures. He says, but you don't have a relationship with me. You don't know me. And then over here, and we're going to use this spoon, Kenny, as a relationship with God. What do you think? You think that's good enough? You think we need some more syrup? Man, we want this thing to be good, right? This spoon represents a relationship with God. Let me know what you think. Sample that. Better believe it. What do you think about that stuff? Not as good, is it? What about that? That's just plain milk, isn't it? Which of those do you think is best? I appreciate it, man. And that's the point. A relationship with God. Here you go, man. You want something good? Have a relationship with God. These other things, they just don't cut it. They're just bland, just kind of going through the motions. But a relationship with God. Obeying Him, serving Him, loving Him. That's something. And today I want to ask those of you that are here, and I know our numbers are slim. It's, you know, we've got people who are out for Labor Day. We've got people who are gone to youth rallies and stuff like that. But you're one of these three, and what I'm asking you to ask yourself this morning is, which one is you? Can you honestly say, I have a relationship with God, and man, it's awesome. I love being here. I love digging into His Word and talking to Him in prayer. Man, I love it. It is sweet. Or maybe you find yourself as a Christian, you're just going through the motions. You don't have a relationship. Maybe you're just here today because, hey, Mom and Dad are making me. Or you're just here today, but if I miss, Slate's going to give me a call, or Michelle Hall's going to give me a call, and I'm going to feel guilty for a week. Or it may be that there are some of you this morning, and you're just saying, God, I don't want any of you. I'm just going to tell you, you're missing out. Because God is so awesome. He is so good. I'm going to close out with this. We're 5 minutes over. I know it. And I appreciate you guys bearing with me. But you know what? God knows everything about you. We may be learning something about Him through this series, but God already knows you. He knows your weaknesses. He knows your failures. And you know what God is asking of you as a Christian is even though He already knows those things, He wants you to confess it to Him. He wants you to give it to Him. And it may be that there are some of you here this morning who, you know what? God already knows, and it's just time for you to confess and say, God, you know what? I want a relationship with you, and it's time for you to start praying for that relationship. But today we're going to go ahead and extend the invitation. Which one are you? Decide in your heart if you need to respond for prayers, or if we can do anything for you, or if you need to come forward today and put on Christ in baptism. You're ready to live for Him. You're ready to break the glass of chocolate and let that stuff start sinking in and living a sweet life. You can do that today. As together we stand and sing.